Good morning. Welcome to Marianna. You're in the heart of the Rural Opportunity Florida region. I'm the Business Development Coordinator, which means I have 10 rural counties that I supply technical and marketing support to. I'm happy to be in Marianna. And where's my marketing partner, Jennifer? Where you at, Jennifer? Jennifer and I are happy not to be in Chicago this week where we were supposed to be, so because they're snowed in. But what I do on behalf of those 10 rural counties is try and help them with technical and marketing support to create jobs. We have partnerships and alliances with our rural cooperative, Power South, with our other electric utility, Gulf Power and NextEra Energy. And what we do is work with our 10 county commissions and their economic development organizations to create jobs. It's great to grow the hemp. It's great to grow cotton. It's great to grow peanuts. It's great to raise beef cattle. From my standpoint, and my boss isn't here at the moment, but we're tired of seeing the stuff being shipped out to be processed. We've got to process here. That's where the jobs are created, okay? All my partners know that. And that's what we're working towards. We've got a great panel. We've got 3 gentlemen from Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services with us this morning. Briefly, I'm just going to call out their names before I introduce them one by one. Stephen Hall is General Counsel. Alan Charles is a Senior Attorney. Brian Benson is an Operations Manager. And then we have Keely Stiff. And Keely sits on the Advisory Hemp Board for the state of Florida, and she's an entrepreneur. So she's going to talk about some real-world practicalities. First of all, though, I'm going to introduce Stephen Hall. Stephen's got a bachelor's degree, a master's in environmental management, and he's got his law degree. He is the general counsel for the Department of Ag and Consumer Services. Best of all, Stephen's a 6th-generation farmer from here in Jackson County up in Malone. We're happy to have him here. He was in Tallahassee, and Stephen, go ahead, and this is your time.
Actually going to stand up. I can't talk sitting down. I will say first, it's good to be home. When they asked if I wanted to come to Jackson County, I said any excuse to come home is a good excuse. So happy to be here with y'all this morning. Alan and Brian and I are here today. We have been part of the team that has been putting the rules together, but what I thought I would do is just give everybody an overview of how we got here, and then we can talk specifics about the rules. I do want to start by managing some expectations first. If you are interested in a deep dive about how the rule and how this is going to work, we are going to, once we get our rules finalized and adopted, we're going to be going around the state and doing another road show and going to have, and probably be right back here in this building and have a very specific, in-depth, this is how you comply with the rules. I suspect we'll be doing that in conjunction with IFAS and another presentation on the research, so look for those dates coming in today. But today we wanted to kind of talk big picture about where we are with the rulemaking, what some of the requirements are, and then we can get into, if you have specific questions, we can talk about that. Alan is a senior attorney in our office who is has helped me draft all these rules, and then Brian is from our division of plant industry and will be instrumental in taking the cultivation permits and administering that program. So we have the right people here to answer your questions today the best we can. I will also tell you and manage those expectations again that we're a little bit unknown at this point as to what this is finally going to look like. Where this started was in December 18th, December of 2018. I was sitting in my office and I saw the headline pop up, President Trump had signed the Farm Bill. Immediately pulled up the Farm Bill final text, saw what was going through, saw hemp, and we started right then and there, said, okay, we got to start, my team, we started going through and see what this says, what does this do, what the state's allowed to do. We then started in the spring working with the legislature and said if we have the authority to do this, we should look at this legislation. This is something Commissioner Freed was very interested in doing. How do we implement this and put this bill together? And so we worked with them to write the bill that became Senate Bill 1020. And in Senate Bill 1020, the legislature gave the department the authority to adopt rules and implement this program. So you have the Farm Bill, which all familiar with, says states can adopt hemp programs, but it has to have these certain things in it. Then we have a statute, Florida statute, that says the department has to run the program a certain way, and we are writing the rules that says if you want to cultivate hemp, this is how you have to do that. Some of the requirements of that are that if you have to pass a background check. The federal government has said that if you want to cultivate hemp, you cannot have a controlled substance conviction within the last 10 years. Some of the other requirements are that you have to have a permit from the department, you have to tell the department where you intend to grow it, and the department has to report that information to the federal government. They want to know everywhere we're growing it and where it's being grown and who's growing it. So in everything flowing from these requirements, the department has a responsibility to write the rules, and we have taken upon ourselves to make this as grower friendly as possible on these cultivation rules. We have tried to take out any of the additional regulations, any burdens, anything like that. We have tried to make this as simple as possible for everybody. But the way the law is written, there are some hoops you have to jump through, and we are trying to make that as seamless and as a process as possible. There are other components to this I think other people would be interested in. Let me just do a show of hands. How many people in the room are interested in growing hemp? All right. How many people are interested in processing or retail sale products? Okay, so there are a few of both. So there will be separate rules. If you want to cultivate, you're going to apply to Brian in the Division of Plant Industry. If you want to process, meaning take the already grown hemp and turn it into something else, if you are going to turn it into a food for ingestion, then you will have to get a separate permit. If you are going to use it for any other industrial purpose, non-ingestion purpose, then no further permitting is required. All right. If it is for it to be ingested, then it will be you'll have to get a permit from our Division of Food Safety, which, just like any other food manufacturer, you'll follow the same laws as we have in place for any kind of food manufacturer like that. So we also have some rules dealing with seed, and I want to take a minute to talk about that. And we also are going to allow it to be put in animal feed, with the exception of livestock, and I'll tell you why in a second, and then also milk and frozen desserts. So if you have any questions about any of those, we can talk about any of those topics. So let's talk about, first, let's talk about seed. Seed is a major topic in this. The state statute said seed must come from a certified seed from a certifying agency, or it can come from a university that is conducting a pilot research program. Jerry Fankhauser from IFAS is going to talk about their project here in a few minutes. So we are, the problem with the certified seed, that is what, if you buy seed from the Foundation Seed Company, if you're buying peanut seed from them, that is certified seed. They are members of what's called AOSCA. It is a registered, intense, multi-year process to get seed become certified. However, there are very few seed available very few hemp seed that are available as certified seed this time. We have called every company we've called every certifying agency in the world that we can get a hold of and asked them, who have you certified hemp seed for? We've only identified 10 hemp seed companies in the world that have hemp seed. And we have a list we're going to put on our website that you can go to and call them and try to get the certified seed. We are also working with the universities to try to find that are doing the research project. Senate Bill 1020, FAMU and UF were the first ones allowed to do that. Senate Bill 1020 opened that up. Now FSU, USF, UCF, Florida Gulf Coast, other universities have shown interest in doing research projects. FAMU and UF are by far, because they had a 2-year head start on the ability to do that. The other ones are coming on board. We are working with them to try to find some language for them to be able to sell seed coming out of their research program if they choose to. It's not a requirement if they choose to, with their qualified partners. But we are trying to do it in such a way that any seed that comes out of that program will be protective of the farmers, and so the farmers will have an idea of what the seed they're getting. I will just be blunt about this. No seed dealer is ever going to certify for you that the seed you're going to buy and you plant is ever going to be less than 0.3 THC, which is the legal limit. That is a risk every producer who puts these hemp seeds in the ground is going to have to deal with and plan for. It is something that the department cannot take the risk out of, but we are doing other things such that to try to be as protective as the producers as possible, with the goal of giving the producers who want to enter into this area as much opportunity as they can find for themselves. So that is the big overview of where we're at. So then we'll go into the timing of this a little bit. So we did workshops starting in June on some draft language. We took a couple thousand pages of public comments out of the workshops, made some changes to the rules, came out with our proposed rules in October. And then on October 31st, the USDA dropped their rules on all the states and said, okay, states, these are the rules you have to follow if you want to adopt a state plan. So now we are looking at the USDA rules that just came out a week or so ago, comparing them to our state rules, and we are going to have to make changes. I will tell you, in our proposed rules, we had the idea that we were going to let the producers sample and then test their own hemp. USDA is not going to allow us to do that. They're going to make the state or our designee be the sample and test. We were also going to give the producers two bites of the apple. If the test came back hot in the vernacular over the 0.3 THC legal limit, we were going to allow it to be retested. USDA says they're not going to allow that. If it tests hot the first time, you get to basically whatever sample you pick that we take the first time, it gets split in half. You can have the second half of your sample tested again, but if both of those come back hot, your crop has to be destroyed. The department, our goal is not to ever have to do that. That is the last thing we want to do is have to take anybody's crop that they're growing. So we are trying to go into this with eyes wide open and talk to everybody about so they understand what the opportunity is. The research UF and FAMU are doing is vital to this. We are in the process, though, as the state, the regulatory agency, of putting this process out there so those who want to enter in this have the opportunity and know what they're getting into and providing that opportunity. So I've talked about seed. I've talked about some of the mix of USDA and cultivation. Where we're at today is I expect we will be putting out what's called a notice of change in the next 2 to 3 weeks, which is going to show what the final rule text is going to be. And then we will be on track for filing our rules for adoption by the end of the year. At that time, then we submit those rules to the USDA for their review. And then when they say yes, we will be able to start taking applications. We hope that should take no more than 30 days. So we're still on track for the ability to take cultivation applications probably in January of next year. That's the track we're still on. If you want the good news is, if you want the process and you manufacturer, those rules don't require USDA approval. All the CBD stores, if you have one of those selling CBDs or anything here in town or anywhere else, if you have that or you want to start processing, we can start issue processing licenses as soon as January 1st because those rules will be finalized by January 1st. So we are going to have an opportunity for those processors to be up and running, to be ready for the crops, to get their permitting, get their everything they need to get stand up to be ready to process crops by the first of the year. And if you have a store or want to sell retail any hemp extract for ingestion, we'll also have the ability to get licensed, and that goes to that. And there are some other, this is probably not the right room to talk about that because I think most of you want to hear about cultivation, but we can take specific questions about the labeling requirements that are in the laws as well if anybody wants to talk about those. So I've talked for about 10 minutes now, kind of giving you a big overview of what we're doing and what timing of this. Commissioner Freed is a big proponent of this issue. Walked in when the first conversations I had with her was, how are we going to do this, what we're going to do. We laid out the plan. We're on plan and on target for meeting her goal of having these rules adopted by the end of the year, which is very fast, I will tell you, for government. I couldn't have done it without the team we have at the department, Brian and his team and my legal team, and a lot of other people around the agency who did a lot of things and put a lot of time into doing this. But I did want to probably stop there and just wait to have we'll answer any questions you have and go from there. And we can get in more in depth, but I would just want to leave time for everybody else and we can come back for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Alan Charles is going to come up next. Alan's a senior attorney, and he heads up several divisions at Ag and Consumer Services. So, Alan.
I think Stephen covered most of it, so I'll just talk for a minute. I'm the program attorney for Division of Plant Industry, so the ones who would be accepting your cultivation applications. The program attorney for food safety, so for the couple people here that were interested in retailing, that'd be the division that would be accepting those. Stephen mentioned the notice of change that we would be filing. Kind of a quirk of how the rulemaking is done. We can't change anything in the rule text right now if we want to keep our adoption timeline. But I encourage you all to continue to voice objections, comments that you have on the rules, and stay engaged in the process because we can always open rules and change them later. Like Stephen mentioned, I'm kind of been the one responsible for drafting a lot of the rule text, so voice all your complaints to me. Stephen just gives me high-level directives, but I'm the face. But I'll leave it to everybody else.
Thank you, Alan. We're going to bring up Brian Benson. Brian's the program manager, so Brian's going to see, I think, a lot of your paperwork on your applications.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Brian Benson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Plant Industry. Our division has been working closely with both Alan and Stephen on drafting these rules. A lot of what we do currently is we have inspectors around the state that conduct inspections at nurseries, nursery stock dealers, with our focus on finding plant pests and diseases early. We help farmers as needed for certification requirements, export certification, and to help get their products to market safe and pest-free. What we will be doing is a lot of our nursery inspectors initially will take over the process of doing initial inspections for growing sites that get approved. We're prepared at our headquarters to start processing applications once the rules are in place. We have started working on a database application so that the application process will be available online. It won't have to be done online, but it'll be a way to speed up the transfer of information to us with our plans to get information back out to you as quickly as possible, and what all the guidelines will be for starting the cultivation of hemp. We anticipate a lot of nurseries getting into the business. Nurseries are already registered with the division. It'll be a smooth transition. If you're not already registered, that application process is available now. If you think you will be a hemp nursery in the future, you can go ahead and register as a nursery. Your local inspector is Larry Smith. He's headquartered out of Panama City. And if you're from outside the area, we have inspectors across the Panhandle and throughout the state. So with that, Stephen pretty much covered a lot of the highlights of where we're at. I will turn it over to questions.
Thank you. You've heard from the guideline side, regulatory side. We're going to take you to the public sector side now. Keely Stiff has a background in the private sector. She's done several business startups. She's also been involved in product development of product lines, branding of those products. She's been involved with developing retail facilities. She got started in the hemp industry about 4 years ago. She and some partners have formed a parent company to do hemp operations here in Florida. She's recognized by Department of Agriculture, who've placed her on the advisor committee and actually have her chairing a subcommittee for ag and cultivation operations. So Keely, if you'd come up and make some comments.
Well, I thought I was going to get to hide behind the table, so I'll stand up for a second. I know it might be strange that I chair a subcommittee on agriculture and field operations. I'm not a farmer. My husband is from Jefferson County, and his family and the families around him have farmed for years. And so I've married into this agricultural environment, and one of my partners is actually from Jackson County, and it's fifth generation farming up here. They were in peanut farming, and then they went into fertilizer. But it gave me a real affinity as we're looking at the rules and trying to figure this out and trying to understand, because originally we were planning to farm, and we probably will do more of a test crop in doing it. But the reason you're all here is because Florida has been able to enact a rule system that will allow everyone to give it a try. They're not pricing you out by fees. They're not moving you out by size. They're allowing people to come in that are small farmers and take a shot at this. And that, I'm very grateful for, and hopefully you guys can see that we're given an opportunity that's not necessarily available to everybody, because this is an expensive thing to get into. It's an expensive business at any angle that you come from, and we're given a chance to not have to at least pay to get into it, and there's a road paved to do that. And in doing so, we've been able to get the rules, but it also puts a lot of responsibility on us in taking on doing something like this, because it is up to us to self-educate. And there are a lot of resources. The Department of Agriculture has been huge about sending out as much information as possible. We do have these advisory council meetings that are open to the public to call in. The next meeting is tomorrow at 4. You can get on the website. You can find that phone number. There's also phone numbers when we do these subcommittee meetings for you to call in and listen as we sit there and discuss how this may affect people. What can we do to get the information out? What can we do to offer support systems? And as this is a community, I know there are people here from other counties. There will be community efforts here. There's community efforts in making sure we all understand what is allowed to be in hemp when we process it, when we send it to a processor. It's a bioremediator, so understanding the soil. This is a peanut-dense area. We can't have crop dusting near our hemp plants. We can't have something coming overhead. And when we do controlled burns, we can't have that fire coming in, because what they found in California is, even being distant from those big fires, the smoke is getting into the hemp plants, and they're having to label their finished product as being smoky. So it is a community effort in that sense for the people who are going to get involved in this, to be able to work with your neighbors and work with local officials when there are things being sprayed, whether it's mosquitoes or crop dusting, so you can work together to have a successful crop, get it to a processor that's going to accept it, or do something yourself. We also have a greatly liberal opportunity to do some home processing, because it's only once you get it to a certain point does it qualify as being processed. There's a lot that we can do, that you can do on your own property, to get it to a point of possibly selling it. So and a lot of this will come through in other conversations and other presentations, but I think the biggest point I wanted to make is this is going to be a self-informed process. And as much as you've had your hands in the dirt, as much as you know how to run that equipment, it's going to be, this is a huge transition into a new industry. And I'm very excited that there are so many people here that are excited about doing it and willing to do it and willing to jump into it. And I'm very appreciative for what they have laid out for us, that we all have that opportunity to do it, because the rules will allow us to do it here in Florida. I'll present more later on the processing side and the getting ready for processing side, but I did want to let you know that there are a lot of resources for us to self-educate, and if you haven't seen them, they are available online. And there are a lot of us that have committed time to just help to get the word out. We want this, it benefits the state to be a great state doing this. It benefits everybody to be known, to be able to have a large production capability. So, business is business, but it really does benefit everybody to go ahead and roll this out in a way that we become a very successful hemp production state. So there are so many of us here that have gotten into it a little earlier that would love to have any conversations with you if that helps you get more information to be successful.
All right, we're ready to open it up for questions. Way in the back. You're gonna have to project now. He's running with the mic. That's his running right there.
So, Roy, before we get started, just to let everybody know, one of the things I neglected to say is where you can find these rules. I get into these conversations. I assume everybody in the room has read that. That's probably a bad assumption on my part. I do lawyer during the week so I can farm on the weekend, so please forgive me. You need to go to the department's website, which is fdacs.gov, fdacs.gov. And if you go to that front page and there's a big search bar, search the word hemp or search the word cannabis, and you're going to find very easily our draft rules. Our draft rules are there, they're public, and there's also an opportunity to sign up to be what's called an interested party so that you get our email updates. We are now sending out weekly email updates with the latest and greatest news and information. We are also using our website as a consolidation point to link to reliable sources. There are a lot of sources out there on the internet. There are a lot of places that say they are selling certified seed, and it may be certified by that entity, but it may not be certified as the statute means it to be. So I would encourage everybody to look at that and go to our website. And if you have questions, you want to pull down your phone while we're sitting here, happy to talk about the language that's out there, or we'll give us, we also have, this is more of a rounding up the question, but just go ahead and I'll say it again at the end. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can email cannabis@fdacs.gov, cannabis@fdacs.gov. That email goes directly to me and to Holly Bell, our director of cannabis. And we email everybody, or a lot of times call everybody back who emails us at that email address with your questions, and try to connect you with the people who can answer your questions. So those two pieces of information while we're getting started. So
A couple different questions. Number one, our state rules have to coincide with USDA rules, correct?
the USDA has a set of requirements that all the state rules must have. So our rules must align with those requirements. We can be different in some ways, but in general they have to align. Yes.
Not a lawyer, but reading the USDA proposed rules, it talked about if it tested over 3.0, it had to be destroyed. A sentence or two later, it said over 3.0 is considered a Schedule I drug. Within the next couple of lines, it said Schedule I drugs can only be handled by certain licensed or permitted people. Is this going to tell us that if after planning and that expense and the expense of maintaining it and the expense of everything else, if we come back with a over 3.0, we're going to have to hire a certified or licensed company to come in and destroy it? That we're not going to be allowed to because it's now a Schedule I drug and not a crop?
That's a great question. First, I want to tell you the department's position has been that this is an agricultural commodity. Congress said it was, the state legislature said it was. USDA's rules, at least these initial rules that they put out there, you may think that they have a different idea about maybe it's not an agricultural commodity. The problem is at 0.3%, that is where the legal limit for hemp ends. That their proposed rules also talk about something called level of uncertainty, which is a scientific, basically, of you got a rounding error problem.
I had a question. All the money this will generate through interstate tax, I know we're a tax-free state, it seems like there's going to be an incredible amount of funds coming in that they can appropriate a certain amount so the farmers are not getting hit with all these extra side fees and everything else. because this is about resurrecting the panhandle. It is about helping everybody. So, I mean, I'm hoping somebody's saying, look at all this money's coming into Florida and producing all the side jobs and everything else. That's going to bring a lot of money coming into cities, counties, and states, and hopefully there could be some kind of ratio or percentages so the farmers aren't getting hit with all these side things, you know?
I completely agree. It's not the department's purpose to build a kingdom on the backs of any fees we collect. If anything we collect will be directed by the legislature to do so. And so we're working with them to try to find as the light of touch as possible to make the program. But the way the legislature treats agencies is the agencies the programs we administer must pay for themselves in the model we are. So there's not a lot. This is not going to be taxed. This is an agricultural commodity, so it's not. I don't expect the Department of Revenue to do any levying additional taxes or anything else like that. Now, on the food pieces of it, there'd be traditional, but as an agricultural commodity, there won't be any additional taxes. Any plants brought in from out of state, there are no taxes for that kind of thing either way. So really the only revenue that the state would have to operate on would be any fees that the legislature directs the department to collect.
I don't mean it wrong, Alan. All I'm trying to say is that $22 billion, governments find a way to get part of it, even though Florida doesn't. So I just want to see if Brian or who might be the point person for some of this discussions we have. I've just been through 40 years of a lot of different road situations, and I see how things can come out the back door. So I just didn't know if any support systems in place or who we might go to discuss some of this ideas, because you got so many things that aren't going to be, that can't be taxable. They say 25,000 products, even if it's 1,000, some of those will be taxable, especially interstate. So that's why I was just hoping something's in place, somebody call ahead for that. Because farmers want to go out and grow and do the crops and not have all the license and other side things. Seems like it could be self-supporting.
That's our goal.
Okay.
Have you made a differentiation between the true industrial crop and everything that's being consumed? Because what I see the vision here for the farmers here is row crops for the whole industrial, the non-consumable end of the cannabis industry. I understand, you know, it's all classified as industrial hemp, but if it's not being consumed, it's grown in a totally different manner than you're growing a production crop for CBD. So the differentiation is there, it's visible. So is that something that's going to be considered for the farmer? Because they can designate that crop will not be intended for any kind of consumption. So for me, I feel that levels of 0.3 should be elevated, or because it's designated as an industrial non-consumable crop, there has to be some wiggle room here for these guys, because like we said, it's the future of industry and moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great comment, and it's well taken. It's one we've heard numerous times. I'm all for not having people jump through hoops they don't need to. You know, for example, why test a crop that's going to be a row, right? Unfortunately, the way that USDA has written their law and the state legislatures wrote their law, they don't differentiate. So,
But it's not the same.
I agree with you. Unfortunately, we don't have the authority to say exempt people out of statutory requirements. That's one that we've suggested to the legislature, and I encourage you to do the same, as well as your federal elected officials, because
I would encourage everyone
Yeah.
in this room to do that, because it is so different. I'm from Northern California, and I've been doing this for 6 years. I don't do row crops, but I do the CBD, and I know what I want to do is the row crop, true industrial, because that whole industry is going to be as big, if not bigger, than the whole CBD side of it. So this is a version. We're standing at a cliff here where nobody's gone before. We're like going to the moon. So it's what our imagination can think of. We got to get processors, industry to catch up with us. You know, we can grow this stuff, but we don't have an outlet for it. And I just want to protect, you know, this and this. moving forward.
Yeah, like I said, it's a great comment, and I completely agree with you. You know, I encourage all of you to get involved with your legislators on that issue.
And it truly is a federal issue. Congress has said, and they told USDA that anybody who cultivates this has to have a permit from their state program or from USDA. Congress is going to be the one that has to change the percentage, the 0.3%, and they're also going to have to say that those cultivating for purposes are exempt from licensing and things like that. So it truly is something well above, our pay grade here at the table as far as that. And if it's there, I'm sure Commissioner Freed would be happy to implement it that way. But it's going to take a congressional change.
I have a question regarding the, maybe in line with the question that the gentleman had. Specifically, the seeds that are being developed by the FAMU and the UF programs, are those going to be available when? And are those going to be certified below 0.3? I know you guys don't specifically work for FAMU or UF, but do you guys have some information on that?
So I think you're going to be hearing from some of those later. I know Jerry is coming up next from IFAS. What the statute allows is it allows certified seed from a certifying agency. That's those 10 dealers that I mentioned earlier, or certified seed or cultivars from a university that has a research pilot program. We are working on language that allows the universities who have a pilot program to be able to sell seeds that come out of the varieties that they grow and are successful in the state. So we will have stuff that we know works here. As a lawyer, I would never allow my client, if I was the university with my client, to certify it's not going to go over 0.3 THC. I doubt you're ever going to see that. We have not seen that anywhere else. But what I think the requirements we're talking about adding for those universities are that it has a certain germination rate, that it has a certain percentage guarantee free of weeds and other non-hemp seeds, things like that. Standard things that you see in every other seed packaging for every other agricultural commodity. So we're trying to treat this like an agricultural commodity without that. But I think that's why I think the information and the research that IFAS and FAMU and hopefully some of the other universities will get involved in and seeing how it's grown will come out of that. And I think what producers should be looking for is best practices for how to grow in certain areas of the state. Look, our research shows us that heat and humidity have as much impact on what, this is just us and us reading what other states have found, have as much impact on the THC level of hemp seed as just about anything else. We live in a hot and humid state. But there are certain times of the year, like today, when it's not very hot and humid outside. So there are conditions upon which things can be grown in industrial space. So one of the things we are allowing is we are limiting in our rule, hemp can only be grown on agricultural land zoned as agricultural, or land zoned as industrial. Or in a nursery. So if any of those things, you can do industrial indoor grows, you can do a little bit more climate controlled. If you're growing for certain things, or if you're growing varieties that have more CBD, which is also tends to have the THC higher component. But if you're growing just a straight industrial that you want to do more as a row crop and outdoor, you're still allowed to do that as well. But I'm just telling you, I have been on the websites, I've been out there and I've seen all the claims and all the things that are on the internet. I would caution everybody not to believe what you read on the internet about anything. Just as a best practice. But I would also tell you that as far as the timing of that, I'm not going to speak for what the universities are, but I know that them and their qualified partners are very interested in bringing those seeds to market. I just don't know when. We are working with them to try to find a way that is done in as fast a manner as possible, but is also that still provides protections to the producers as possible as well. So it is with speed you lose protection, but we don't want to be the turtle, we don't want to be the hare. We want to make sure we get there and have as much seed as possible to meet the demand that we think we're going to have, but without putting too much risk on the producers and allowing just to completely, say but whatever. So I hope that answered your question.
Just one more final question. It's a two-part combination. How many acres can you cultivate per permit, and how long does the permitting process take?
So for everybody who didn't hear, the question was how many acres can you cultivate, and how long does it take to get your permit? So the first question is, we don't have a limit. You can do as little or as many acreage as you want. The second question, we're constrained by statute that we have to approve permit applications within a certain timeline. The longest is 90 days. We generally shoot for at least 30 days. Brian might be able to weigh in on what his average turnaround and what their expectations are.
I think 30 days is going to be a target, if not sooner.
So target of 30 days, hopefully sooner than that.
And I think part of your question was how long does the permit last? The statute says it's an annual permit, so you would apply annually.
Talking about changes to, or expected changes having to be made to the Florida rules, just those two changes are what are anticipated, or do you guys foresee different or more changes to it, to the Florida rules?
Our biggest anticipated changes are in the cultivation rule. Most of the other rules we just are making technical changes to. So for the cultivation, I think the biggest change you're going to see is who does the sampling, when it has to be done, and when you can harvest by. Because the other thing I neglected to say earlier, I think Alan mentioned, is we had said you had to notify us 30 days prior to harvest. The USDA rule requires that your crop must be tested no more than 15 days prior to harvest now. So we're going to have to conform to that 15 days. We're probably still going to ask you to tell us 30 days in advance of when you intend to harvest, so we can make sure we get all the ducks in a row to get out there, sample that 15 days, and we're working out the language to see if the clock starts on day 15, it goes to the test. Most of the labs we've talked to, we're trying to decide if we're going to do this in-house, if we have capacity to do this within our own laboratories, or if we're going to have to hire out to private labs. Most of the labs, our lab scientists and the private labs have told us that test results in general can be turned around 72 hours from receipt of the sample. So what you're looking at is probably that within that first week of the day of the sample, given some time for mailing and movement, that you would have our sample results back. And we are parsing the language and trying to get some clarification from USDA as to far as whether can the crop be harvested the same day that the sample is taken, or does it have to wait until the results are back? We think it reads one way. We're not. I'm not going to tell you which way it is, but we're trying to figure that out. And also we have some time set up with USDA. We're hoping in other states to make sure we're kind of all following the same line. So we're trying not to do anything that sets Florida farmers up at a disadvantage, especially up here in the Panhandle with growers from other states. But we are allowing, I'll take this advantage because I think we're running out a bit of time. I will do this, pitch this as well. Everybody is aware of our Fresh from Florida campaign. We are going to open up Fresh from Florida, allow to our hemp crops as well. But we are going to add a separate piece. We have designed, our division of marketing has assigned a hemp logo. If you, we're going to be doing rulemaking here shortly that says if you grow, harvest, obviously you grow and harvest the same place. If you grow, process hemp in Florida, we're going to have a different emblem. You may notice it on some of our webpages, some of our materials. If you've seen that, that will be available to signify that that hemp is grown in Florida, and it's Florida grown and Florida processed here. So we will have that as well. So Fresh from Florida will be available for if it's grown and then processed somewhere else. But if it's grown and processed here in the state, you'll get an additional notification so that everybody knows where your crop was it grown and processed from.
Go ahead.
Okay, for Steve and.
Mike, for you, hang on one second.
Yeah, we're recording it. You're testing at the IFAS research facilities at Apopka and Quincy, confirmed by me from the pharmacy department at UF. The THC levels rose on those crops above the level and then later came back down. This has been confirmed to me by farmers in North South Carolina and Tennessee. Now, are we expected to harvest this before it goes over the 0.3 level? Or knowing what the hemp plant does, the sativa plant, it comes back down? Are we going to be able to do that? With the new federal guidelines that came out, and in California, the big headlines, that they seized 400 and something acres of hemp and destroyed it last week or last month. You know, that concerns me. I would like your opinion of that.
It concerns me too. We saw a lot of headlines. We saw Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, a lot of places lost a lot of what they grew. A lot of also places, what they did grow and were legally able to harvest, they didn't have processors. I'm going to hedge, and I'll answer your question. I'm not going to forget it. We have, the department have been working hard to find and develop processors, make sure we have processors here in the state so that our producers have somebody to sell to. I'm going to punt on part of your question to actually what happened to Jerry, who's in charge of this, and I think he's coming up next about what actually happened. That has to do with that 15-day window that I talked about, that USDA has come out with, that we were reviewing, because we know at the end of that crop life, a day or two could make a big difference. And so that is why I'm being very careful, because I don't want to spill any misinformation out there about what I say today may not be where we finally land on this, because we're still waiting on to make some final interpretations. But our goal is that to give the producer as much flexibility as possible, because I will say it's the department and the commissioner's goal is to never have to take anybody's crop. We're going to work with our producers as much as we can within the limits of the law to make sure that you have every opportunity and as much flexibility as possible. But what the law says, and ultimately the department is a creature of law and we have to enforce it, is that a hemp crop cannot be harvested if it's over that legal limit. So that is what we're dealing with, and there's a lot of ways how we get to that point. And that's what we're working on to make sure that, again, the producer has as much flexibility as possible, but also that we're all complying with the law at the same time.
I think we're having some good conversation. I was told we can go maybe another 5 minutes. I've got another question here in the back.
So my question relates to how many times on a permit can a crop test hot? I don't know. Can y'all hear me?
Yep, I got it. So the question for everybody was, how many times on a permit can a crop test hot? There's requirements in both the state law and the USDA Farm Bill that speak to that. I'm blanking on it. I'm pretty sure it's 3. You're telling me it's 3. But I'm pretty sure it's 3 within 5 years, maybe. There's also this kind of quirk with a mental state, whether or not you were a negligent mental state or culpable. We're still kind of interpreting what that means. USDA's put out their interim final rule where they kind of parse that a little bit. But I'll kind of echo what Stephen said. Our goal is not to take anybody's crop or revoke anybody's license either. So we're going to be as flexible as possible within the confines of the law.
The follow-up to that was, does that accommodate on-farm variety trials? Since you don't have a lot of information on which won't go hot, does a farmer have the ability to do an on-farm variety trial, and does the same limitation apply?
I'm going to climb out on a limb here, okay? The university is under the 1004 statute. They're the only ones allowed to do research. You grow. If I were a farmer, I'd be doing my own testing. And if I had something that I didn't like the way it looked, I might call us and say, I'm not harvesting that, I'm plowing it under.
question for Stephen. On the 10 worldwide seed certification companies that you've identified, how many of those are in the U.S.?
I don't know the number off the top of my head. We are going to, and there are complications. I acknowledge there are complications for importing from out of the country and getting those seed here. I think Jerry will probably tell you it took him several months to get the seed in from China, almost 6 or 7, if I remember your story right, Jerry. I think the majority of them are in the States because I understand the majority of them were seeds that were certified by these certifying agencies as far back as the 1920s when they were grown heavily in other states. And they're holdover seeds from those varieties. I don't know off the top of my head, but what we are going to do is we are still going to put that list on our website and with contact information for all those companies.
That was my next part of that question was going to be, are those companies on the website now, or when can we anticipate those being up?
We have not posted it yet because we were waiting on some information. And we are also we wanted to make sure that the companies we have identified are actually going to be complying with our regulations. Now that we have a better idea of what those final regulations are going to look like, I expect that list will go up in the next couple weeks.
Thank you. Keely, for you, the advisory panel meeting tomorrow at 4, where can we get information on the dial-in for that?
It should be on the website.
Go to the department's website, fdax.gov, and I would go to, the best place to go for that information is our calendar and events page, and all of the public meeting notices are linked there with the call-in information.
Got one last question here.
So I was curious if there had been any discussion regarding crop insurance with hemp, and if that was something that if hemp tested hot, that there could be some help regarding that. So if the hemp tested hot, crop insurance may possibly cover some of the costs associated with that.
So crop insurance, as you know, is done at the federal level, so we don't have any direct authority over that. They have issued guidance as far as the THC level, and kind of echoing what we've been saying before, USDA has taken a very strict approach that after 0.3, it ceases to be hemp, and at that point it's marijuana and is no longer eligible for USDA crop insurance, which I think was a big surprise to a lot of us. There may be private entities out there that are willing to insure you. It may be expensive, but again, that's one of those issues that we have no control over, so I really encourage you to reach out to both state and federal law legislators on that one.
USDA, actually, I'm a little surprised. USDA has a pretty good webpage with a lot of information on it. They seem to put up something once or twice a week. So I'd go look around at USDA's webpage. They put a lot of guidance documents out there and things like that. A lot of it's focused at the states who are drafting these programs. But there is some other information that's out there for growers that's pretty good. And we're pulling a lot of that down and putting it on our website as well, trying to make it easily as accessible as possible. But so trying to make that information. I'm going to plug one more time, Roy, before we go. fdax.gov/cannabis is the webpage to get directly to hemp and everything related to cannabis at the state. And cannabis@fdax.gov is our email address. We try to personally email you a response if we can, or sometimes call you if your question is a little bit more complicated, to provide you with as much information as possible. That is something as a monitored email we're checking and working with daily. So cannabis@fdax.gov and then fdax.gov/cannabis.
Before we go, I'd be remiss, there's a gentleman that's had his arm up with his hat in his hand for 10 minutes. Sir, I'm not going to close this out until you ask this question, but you're going to have to talk real loud.
stuff, pesticides and what, and so basically what can be we utilize as being farmers as far as chemicals, or have y'all gotten that far yet?
Well, good to see you, Lonnie. Thank you for showing up. Appreciate that. I know where you live, so we got you on the list already. He farms right down the road from us, so I know where he's at. So GPS, the GPS was requirement is that part of your application process, you have to submit the GPS coordinates for the plot where you're going to plant your cannabis. Somewhere on your farm that shows that. That is a federal requirement that's made it down to the bill. That's part of this requirement that we have to report that information up to USDA. They want to know exactly where it is. We are, on the state requirement, we are required that you put a sign on the gate accessing the field where you're growing it to let everybody know that you have a permit to grow the hemp that is growing in that field. Because I will tell you, if you did not know this, you cannot, now, some of the people who've been doing this a lot longer than me can tell you they can smell the difference between the two. But I will tell you, law enforcement swears they cannot see or smell the difference between hemp and marijuana. So that's why we're asking to put a permit number that's been issued by the department on the sign on the gate, so everybody knows what you have and what's in that field is legally being grown. All right. So that's the GPS question. As far as the pesticide list, there are no, again, because the feds have a different perspective on cannabis than the states do. There are no currently approved pesticides labeled for cannabis use, correct? But we are working with USDA on that, and we are also working on, there are some plants, there are some pesticides that we have worked with the Department of Health for use on marijuana, for the medical marijuana. That list is easily to find. There's a list in a rule that the DOH has used. I would start there. I would also tell you that there are some varieties, it's two parts. You got to be federally labeled and you have to be registered in the state. There are some that are federally labeled and registered in the state that are able to be used on all plants, or if you're not growing for consumption, for plants not grown for consumption, things like that. I would think about pesticides used but we used to use to spray on tobacco. So we are currently, our AES team, Ag and Environmental Services team, is working through that list, and we're going to come up with more information on that probably after the first of the year. I know we're out of time. Alan and I are going to stick around a little while afterwards. I think we're going to a break. We're here. We're happy to stick around as long as we can to answer questions and for anybody we didn't get to. So.